Hi, I'm Sandy Wilson, and I live in Portland, Oregon, and I'm a therapist there. And my husband and I, quite a few years ago, started Tuff Stuff Ministries, mainly to deal with sexual addiction and the spouses. And I work a lot with women who have their husbands are sexual addicts. That's the bulk of my client load. But I have a personal story to tell. And I want to start this video with my personal story, and then I'm going to do some other video clips where I talk about some of the things that we as women get stuck in the process of healing. And so our story starts back, well, probably starts in 1979. I became aware that my husband, there was just something not right in our marriage, and I asked him, and he told me he had fallen in love with one of his clients. And so I said to him, I need you to break it off or I'm out of here. And I just assumed he had broken it off. I probably didn't ask and for quite a while. And then as we went along, for about 5 years later, I began to know there just wasn't something right in our relationship. And I would, take him on these long talks and push on him, and he would lie and tell me, no, everything was just fine. But in 1989, my husband and I had been at an Oregon football game, and we came home, we'd won, so we were just pumped pretty high. And when we got to the house, our oldest daughter met my husband at the door, and he said, you got a certified letter in the mail today. And it was from the Board of Psychologists. He is a psychologist, and so he took it, and he read it, and I went to put the kids to bed. We have 5 children, and kind of got them all tucked in bed. And when I got in bed, I asked him, I said, what was in that letter? And he said, oh, not much. We'll talk about it tomorrow. So we got up and got ready for church and went to church, and we were listening to the pastor, and all of a sudden I glanced down the row, and there's Earl with tears running down his face. And I thought, that's odd. Earl doesn't cry. And so it just kind of puzzled me. I thought, well, couldn't figure out what that was about. But, I turned back, listened to the rest of the sermon. We got the kids in the car and got home, of course. And we had lunch. And my husband stood up from the lunch table, and he said, I'm going to go for a walk. And I thought, that's odd. He doesn't go for walks. So I was washing the dishes, and all of a sudden I went, okay, I wonder what was in that letter. That's the only thing I can think of that's happened that it's kind of created this change in him. So I went back to our bedroom and took the letter down, and which I typically don't read other people's mail, but that seemed like something I need to do that day, and I did. And in it, it said that this former client had filed a complaint, and she said that Earl terminated therapy with her early, and then he became involved sexually with her. And my first thought was relief. And I went, I was right. There was something going on for this last 10 years. And so I kind of walked back out to the kitchen, and he came in and sat down at the table, and he said, I got something I need to tell you. And he told me what was in the letter. And I remember I bent down beside his chair, and I said, Earl, we'll get through this. And that was Sunday afternoon, and I don't know what we did the rest of the evening. It's kind of all a blur at this stage of life. And we got up and went to work the next morning and came home again, went to bed. In the middle of the night, I woke up and I was angry. And I went and I got up and found a tablet, and I began to write. And I probably wrote for about 4 hours, just poured out my heart on this piece of paper, and on and on and on, and about all the things that were hurting me. And about, I don't know, 4 or 5 o'clock, I made a decision that I was going to get a divorce. I just couldn't stay. There'd just been too much. And so when Earl got up, I said, okay, I need to talk to you about something, but we've got to get to work now, and had to get the kids off and all that kind of stuff. And so we looked at our schedules, and Thursday evening was the first we had time to get together. And so we said, okay. And we went to a restaurant, and I said to him, I want a divorce. And he began to beg me, please don't get a divorce, don't get a divorce. And I said, no, I've made up my mind, I want a divorce. And he said, well, you're going down to Cannon Beach for the weekend. He said, would you just think about it for the weekend? And I said, okay. I finally agreed I would do that. So I had to go down to speak for a women's conference. And to this day, I wonder what on earth I may have said to those women. I know I didn't tell them what was going on in my own life because it was just too raw and painful. But I sort of remember pulling up at the motel and sort of saying, okay, Lord, here's Earl, and sending him over on the, there was, of course, not Earl, but this imaginary box over on the other seat, and said, I'll pick him up on Sunday afternoon. And that's sort of what I did. And then Sunday, when I went down to the beach, that's just one of my favorite places, and I found a big log and sat down on this log and said, okay, Lord, what are we going to do? And we chatted for a while, and finally I felt like God said to me, Sandy, I don't care if you go or if you stay, but I'm going to be with you no matter what choice you make. I just wanted him to answer it. I didn't want to have to make the choice. But I got back in the car and headed home. Had about a 2-hour drive. And about somewhere along the way, I decided I'd stay a year. So when I got home, that's why I said to Earl, I'll stay a year. And I remember I had 2 or 3 things that I wanted. And I said, first of all, you absolutely have to break off the relationship. There can be no more contact whatsoever. And then I asked him to get counseling. Those were kind of the 2 major things. And then we sort of started living life. He started looking for a counselor, trying to decide what else did we need to do, because we weren't sure what this letter to the board was going to mean. And then somewhere kind of in the next couple of weeks, I began to realize that one of the things I do is I let Earl talk me out of my stands. And I thought, he's just going to talk me out of going to counseling because he said he couldn't find anybody, and I was beginning already to feel like I wanted to waver on it. And so I thought, nope, I got to have somebody who comes around us, somebody who helps hold Earl accountable, that this be different than the last time. And so we knew a couple, and they're down on Catalina Island, and so I said, Earl, I need us to have these couples. Or we didn't know if it would be 1 or 2 or 3. We weren't sure what that meant. That come around us. And he said, okay, he called Paul and Virginia Friesen, and he did that. And they said, okay, come on down, and we set a time when we could do that. And then we flew down to California. And Earl began to share his story with them. And, you know, they listened very faithfully, and about partway through the day, Virginia said, Earl, she said, we've worked with somebody else that's done this, and they said, one of the things we've noticed is often people don't tell everything. They will tell you what they want you to know, and they don't sweep the corners clean. And she said, I think for healing to take place, you've got to be sure you've swept out everything. And Earl said, oh yes, I've told you everything. And then Paul said, if we're going to come alongside of you, we want you to be accountable to us for a minimum of 2 years. And whatever we ask you to do, that you'll do it. And Earl agreed to that. And then he said, one of the first things we want is that you give up all speaking and all your writing. And Earl began to cry. And Earl began to sob. And I got angrier and angrier because, you see, he hadn't cried like that when he told me what he'd done. It was the most painful moment, I think. Whew, didn't know that was going to bother me. We went back to Paul and Virginia's, and we were staying with them in their home. We went back to their house, and eventually, sometime that evening, we went to bed. And in the middle of the night, I knew Earl was up. And I thought, I don't even care. I just was numb with pain. Food tasted like sawdust, and it was just hard to live. So Earl, when I woke up about 6, he said, Sandy, I need to tell you and Paul and Virginia some things. And I said, okay. So he got up and he said, there's more, there's lots more. He said, I don't even know if I can name all the things right now. So it was talked over and agreed that when we got home, he would write a letter, and he'd write everything down, and Paul and Virginia would then come to Portland, and we'd go over the letter at that time. Then they also asked if we would find another couple, 2 couples to come alongside And we said, yeah, we'd try and do that by the time they came. And I don't remember, it was probably about 3 or 4 weeks before they were going to come and be with us. And so after we returned home, Earl was going to take our boys, and they went elk hunting, or deer hunting, I don't know, hunting, I'll just say that. And they were gone. And Earl went early, and he spent apparently quite a long time and wrote a letter. And when he returned home, he said, do you want to read it before Paul and Virginia get here? And I said, yes, I did. And I read that letter, and it told that he'd been involved with topless strip clubs, and he'd been with prostitutes, and he'd been to massage parlors, and he told me a lot of categories. I didn't want to know details. He'd been involved with pornography and self-stimulation, and so typical of many men have gone through. I didn't know it at that time, but anyway, I was totally disgusted. And when Paul and Virginia came, and one of the things the reason I bring this up is that when they came and they read the letter, and one of them said something about prostitutes, plural, I can just remember that it was like brand new information to me. I'd read it, but I think we sometimes can't handle all of what we're hearing, and so we scrunch it down to as little as possible. And I said, there was more than one? And he said, yes. And I remember I just got up and went in the back bedroom and crawled in bed and curled up in the fetal position and went to sleep. And that was sort of the beginning of our journey.